Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The bill that will allow the government to trigger Article 50 and begin Brexit negotiations was voted through by the House of Commons last week. Many MPs were in a difficult position, unsure whether to vote with their conscience, their constituency, their party or their country. Europe, one such a divisive issue for the Conservatives, is now causing major divisions inside the Labour Party. So let's have a look at what happened in a bit more detail. Thanks to academic research carried out since the referendum, we now have estimates of how each individual constituency voted. It's thought that 410 constituencies voted Leave and 240 voted Remain. On Wednesday night, the EU notification of withdrawal bill was voted through by the House of Commons. 494 MPs voted for the bill and 122 against. The bill left the Labour Party divided. Jeremy Corbyn told his MPs to respect the result of the referendum and vote for the government's bill. 162 of them did so, but 52 Labour MPs defied Mr Corbyn's three-line whip and voted against the bill. That's about a fifth of the Parliamentary Labour Party. Of those 52 Labour MPs who voted against the bill, the majority, 45 of them, represent seats that voted Remain. However, 7 Labour MPs voted against the Article 50 bill, even though their constituents voted Leave in the referendum. The Conservative Party is much more united. The vast majority of Tory MPs, 320 of them, voted for the bill. Just one Conservative MP, Ken Clarke, voted against it. His constituency, Rushcliffe in Nottinghamshire, voted Remain.
Vote to Remain next Thursday on the 23rd. Thank you very much.
But when that day came, some 70% of Labour constituencies ignored the advice and voted Leave, while 94% of Labour MPs backed Remain. Now, the debate triggering Brexit, which Labour wanted, has put Labour's agonies on display.
Labour stands for remaining in the European Union.
His constituency voted 72% to leave.
I think this referendum in part stemmed from a deep frustration about politics and the sense of disaffection from politics that there is in the country. And therefore, I think a heightened reason for saying that this process must begin is we do not want to give the sense that people having voted for Brexit because they felt they'd been ignored are being ignored once again.
And some people have accused me.
Tulip Siddique's seat did follow her advice to vote Remain, and she's defying the party whip and giving up her front bench job to vote against the bill.
In Hampstead and Kilburn, we do not wince when we hear people speaking in a different language on public transport. We do not blame the very real pressures on our health system, on our criminal justice system and on our housing by scapegoating others.
Allegra makes an important point, which is you are somebody who set yourself up as particularly listening to members. Now, I would suspect that most Labour members would not wish Article 50 to be triggered. So why are you forcing your MPs to vote in the second reading for Article 50 to be triggered to give the Prime Minister the authority she craves?
There was a referendum across the whole of the UK. That referendum produced a result, a majority to leave. Therefore, Parliament, I think, has to respect that. Parliament voted to hold a referendum.
So it's that referendum, which means on this one issue, the views of your members are less important.
Obviously, I'm very well aware of the views of members. The vast majority of members of the Labour Party and affiliated supporters voted to remain.
They did.
Of Labour voters, probably, according to YouGov polls, around 60–65% voted to remain. But it is a division across the country. In constituencies like mine, there was a massive majority to remain. In equally strong Labour constituencies, mainly in the northwest and northeast, there was an equally strong vote to leave. I think we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we said, well, actually, we know better than the result of the referendum. So instead, I've made it quite clear that we would respect the result of the referendum.
Take the position of somebody like Clive Lewis, very important in the Labour Party and a very clear position. He voted for Article 50 in the first vote, but he says, look, we have these very, very important amendments. We need to change this legislation. We need to change it for workers' rights, tariff-free access to the EU, help for EU citizens and all the rest of it. And if we don't get those, then I'm going to vote against it. That is a totally logical position. What is wrong with that?
What's wrong with it is that we have said that we will not frustrate Brexit.
You see, there's an awful lot of people on the other side of the divide, as it were, who are passionate Remainers, who are deeply disappointed that they see the Labour Party has become, in effect, a cheerleader for Brexit. You have no plan or way of actually altering Theresa May's planning. And we saw that this week.
I reject the conclusion made there, although I do understand why people who believe in the EU are disappointed. But look, we're a democratic party. I don't think we had any choice but to respect the decision of the people in that referendum. You know, in that sense, you're talking about philosophy. You know, direct democratic decisions have trumped the decisions of representative democracies there. It shows that a referendum is a brutal tool. It doesn't allow you to deal with nuance and complexity afterwards. But we have had to respect the decision of the people to fire that starting gun.
Let's have a quick look here at what you said last month. I'm not going to give Theresa May a blank cheque, but this week you voted through an unamended Article 50 bill, giving Theresa May a licence, therefore, to go forward with her version of Brexit. I mean, that sounds a lot like a blank cheque, doesn't it?
The Labour Party is a national party and we represent the nation. And the nation is divided on this and it is very difficult. And many MPs representing majority Remain constituencies have this very difficult balancing act between do I represent my constituency or do I represent the nation? Labour as a national party have a clear view. We have been given our instructions. We lost the referendum. We fought to stay in Europe. But the public have spoken, and so we do as we're told.
At the same time, if you're talking about what people did on the battlefield,
yes,
you voted in favour of Article 50, completely unamended. No Labour amendments got through. And I just want to drill down into why you did that. I mean, you previously said, for example, that leaving the single market is an act of self-harm that would tank the economy.
That's right. But the problem...
Why did you vote for an act of self-harm, then?
The problem... Well, I voted to implement a national poll and a democratic result in a referendum.
Let me show you one more chart up there on the screen, and then we'll go to John Curtis to get his reaction. These are the leader net approval ratings. And there you see, I think you can conclude from that, nobody's that popular. But Mrs May is in positive territory, the Prime Minister, at 6%. Mr Farron is negative at -10 approval rating. Mr Nuttall -18. Could be falling even lower in recent days, but this is the latest poll we have. But the big figure here, which you can see, is Mr Corbyn, -35 net approval rating, in that way in a league of his own. And when you take that coupled with the Labour's opinion poll ratings graph, which we can see, it's not a great sign. John Curtis, you follow these charts and graphs and polls more closely than anybody else. What do you think is the explanation for that? But let's stick with the 20, Labour down at 27. I think in one poll they were down at 24, which is really dangerous territory for them. What's your explanation?
Well, I think that you could be asking me about the short term and the long term. I mean, the long term is fairly clear. Long term difficulty number one for Labour is that how do they persuade people that actually a social democratic party like Labour can manage capitalism in such a way that, to use the current jargon, the jams, the left behind, actually feel that Labour can govern in their interests. And I think the truth is that since the financial crash, it's been very difficult for Labour to make the case. And that's a problem that's not unique to the Labour Party. It's common to a number of social democratic parties. The second problem the Labour Party has is, frankly, a problem of leadership. It's clearly that so far, at least, Jeremy Corbyn has convinced very few people in the country that he has what it takes to be Prime Minister. But of course, in a sense, the other real problem is that once you raise that point, you then kind of go on to, well, who is there on the front bench of the Labour Party that actually might be capable of persuading the public that they look like a prime minister. And shall we suggest that so far at least nobody has clearly stepped into those particular shoes? And I think in a sense it's quite remarkable last week that a speech by an ex-Labour prime minister who has an awful lot of baggage surrounding him actually made much more buzz than, frankly, any speech been made by any current Labour politician for some considerable time. So I think that's the long-term issue. Now, there's also, I think, however, a short-term problem for Labour that perhaps Labour have failed to appreciate. What I've particularly been looking at is the decline in Labour support since the summer of last year. In other words, since Theresa May became Prime Minister and since Labour had its leadership election. Now, if this was simply a problem to do with, for example, dislike of Jeremy Corbyn, you'd expect the decline in the Labour vote to happen both amongst Remain voters and amongst Leave voters. Well, it hasn't. It's occurred almost exclusively amongst those Labour voters who voted to remain, and it looks as though that what they've done is gone to the Liberal Democrats. And I think the short-term problem, though it's a pretty fundamental problem, that Labour may face is that having decided to vote in favour of Article 50 rather than perhaps simply abstaining, they've misread their electoral situation, which is that actually a clear majority of Labour voters, people who voted for Labour in 2015, voted to remain, and they've been trying to chase the mythical working class Labour Leave voter, but these are quite thin on the ground. And that actually Labour, given its wider political difficulties, the first thing it has to do is to try to hang on to its existing vote, and I think its stance on Brexit has put that at risk.
That's very interesting, John Curtis.
I've been getting away with it all my